they said, Joe Biden, we want to take money, okay, from the rich and put it back into the pocket of middle class people. Anyone making over $250,000 a year is going to pay more. You got it. It's time to be patriotic. Laughing at Ella's comment. But so with Biden, what is patriotism to Biden? Well, if you make more money, you've got to pay more taxes. You know, I mean, that's just legalized theft. Why, just because you make more money, does the government have a right to your money? I mean, it's fundamentally wrong. Barack Obama said the same thing, and this was in a famous back and forth with a guy who's come to be known as Joe the Plumber. He was on a street corner, I think, in Ohio, but he says, Obama said, I think when you spread the wealth around, it's good for everybody. Spreading the wealth around, again, taking from the rich, giving to the poor. You see the similarities to Karl Marx's statement. But here's the problem. If you give the civil government enough power to do anything it wants in the name of doing good, then look out, because you have just created a monster. Because man is sinful, man is depraved, and you're giving man too much power. Years ago, this quote has been attributed to Abraham Lincoln, although nobody's really sure who said it first. But the same government that is powerful enough to put bread on your table is powerful enough to take it away. A lot of people have grabbed this quote. Some of you may be familiar with Fred Thompson. He was a presidential candidate in 2008. He does a lot of commercials today. He's been in a lot of movies and TV shows like Law and Order, and he was the FBI agent in Baby's Day Out. Good movie, funny movie, right? Good kids movie. Anyway, during his campaign, he was fond, when he was running for president, he was fond of quoting this statement, that the same government that is powerful enough to put bread on your table is powerful enough to take it away. Now, again, nobody's really sure who first said this, and so that's why I put question marks by Lincoln's name. But whoever did say it, in a very clever analogy, has explained why the Founding Fathers looked for ways to limit the power of the federal government. You know, you can give the civil government immense powers with all good intentions. You know, you can have all the good intentions in the world, give all this immense power to civil government, but because it bears the sword, because it uses force, because man is sinful, it can use that power to oppress people, and usually it does more often than it ends up helping. You know, look at these death totals perpetrated by the governments that you see on the screen. Except for Nazi Germany, these governments believed in Marx's principle. You know, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. They believed in big, powerful government. But even Nazi Germany believed in big, powerful government. Okay, they all believed in strong, powerful government. Well, not surprisingly, governments in the 20th century alone killed 169 million people. Now, that's not in war. That's not a war figure. That is like government murder of its people. These figures, by the way, were compiled by a history professor at the University of Hawaii, R.J. Rummel. Check out what he says. In total, during the first 88 years of the 20th century, almost 170 million men, women, and children have been shot, beaten, tortured, knifed, burned, starved, frozen, crushed, or worked to death, buried alive, drowned, hung, bombed, or killed in any other of the myriad ways governments have inflicted death on unarmed, helpless citizens and foreigners. It is as though our species has been devastated by a modern black plague, and indeed it has, but a plague of government power, not germs. Yeah, very pleasant indeed, right, James? You know, that's an average of 1.5 million people every year being killed by government outside of war. See, that's the problem with giving government too much power. Now, as scary as that number is, the next percentage is really scary. But almost one half of American teenagers think that the phrase "from each according to his ability to each according to his need" is in our Constitution. Yeah. Although we actually do see this principle working in our country, it is not in our founding documents. Now, this is why we take civil government class, because I noticed some of you guessed that this statement was in our Constitution or Declaration. That's okay. That's why you study government, to learn that actually this is not in our founding documents and is very offensive to the whole premise of our founding document. But where do you see this principle at work in our country? Where do you see this principle of taking from the rich and giving to the poor? Don't you see this in our tax rate? Yeah, in Obamacare, that's exactly right, where those who make more are paying more to help pay for those, like in welfare or Obamacare, for those who are not as well off. When President Ronald Reagan came into office, this country was suffering under a 70% tax rate. So for the richest people, they were paying 70% in taxes. So $7 out of every 10 went to the government. And that just squelches business, because people end up taking their business elsewhere. But see, that's not the belief of the Founding Fathers. They believed in checks and balances. They did not believe in Marxist principles. Speaking of people taking their business elsewhere, one of the 5 Facebook co-founders, Eduardo Saverin, he renounced his U.S. citizenship and moved to, I think it was, to Singapore, because he wanted to escape the U.S. taxes, which were so high. That's what happens, is people take their money outside of the country, and so it actually ends up hurting business and jobs and things like that. But our founding fathers rejected this. They believed in limiting the power of government, not expanding the power of government. That was their thinking, which was based on a biblical worldview. Now let's review some of chapter 1. As you read chapter 1, you read about several checks and balances. What were some of the big checks and balances that were mentioned in chapter 1? Go ahead and list them, if you would, in your chat box. Let's see, you guys did read about chapter 1, right? Okay, good. The 3 branches, yes, separation of powers, election and re-election of representatives, which refers to as Adrian pointed out, a republic. And then there was one more. You got the separation of powers, you got the republic. The other one was the, federalism. Yeah, there you go. Those are your 3. There's more, but those are the ones that were mentioned in chapter 1 and really emphasized. Now let's first talk about republic. This is a biggie because, it is fashionable today to say that we're a democracy. So let's talk about that. What is a republic? Well, I think Ben explained it well. It's where you have representatives and they can be elected. Right? So it's ruled by representation. Our representatives make the law. How is that different from a pure democracy? What happens in a pure democracy? Who makes the laws in a pure democracy? It is the people who make the laws. Now on page 19 in the book, you had question number 3, which basically asked you which system of government, a republic or a democracy, best reflected the idea of checks and balances, and why? Which one do you think, republic or democracy, best reflects the concept of checks and balances? Now, republic is the right answer, although a lot of people might want to say democracy because, as Ben says, everybody participates. Hey, everybody participates. So why wouldn't democracy be the best form of check and balance? Why is a republic a better check and balance? In a democracy, yeah, the majority can do whatever they want. So that's the weakness of a democracy, is that you've got what's called the tyranny of the majority, right? But what happens in a republic? In a republic, you have majority in democracy can abuse the rest of the people. So you guys are certainly nailing the problem with democracy. But a republic best reflects the idea of checks and balances because only in a republic is there a way to punish the lawmakers. Yeah, as Hannah says, authority is accountable. There is somebody who can hire them and fire them, right? In a republic, elected officials are not only under the law, they must also answer to the people. And so if they're abusing their power or acting unconstitutionally, they can be fired by their employers, the people. But in a democracy where the majority of the people, let's say they're sticking it to the minority, and they're just abusing the minority either through slavery or high taxes or taking away their rights in some other way. How do you punish the lawmakers? How do you fire them? See, that level of checks and balances is missing. So our founders were very brilliant to establish us as a republic. Now, you could say we're a democratic republic since our representatives are accountable to the people and the people can hire and fire them. You could say we're a constitutional republic because our lawmakers are under a constitution. But we are a republic, not a democracy. When you recite the Pledge of Allegiance, how many of you either I don't know, don't you do this in either Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? If any of you have done that, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the democracy for which it stands, the republic for which it stands. I mean, we even recite it, right? We are a republic, and this is a very important check and balance. Another important check and balance is that of having a constitution. How does a constitution serve as a check and balance? Well, it is the highest man-made law that governs a country. It restricts the power of government. It says, here is what you are authorized to do, hence everything else you cannot do. Some of you may have heard of Michael Ferris. He's the founder of the Homeschool Legal Defense. Hopefully all your families are members because they provide protection services. But he's a constitutional attorney, and he explains this point very well. He says the purpose of a constitution is to grant power to government and to limit the power of government. A private person can never violate the Constitution. Only the government can violate the Constitution. This is really important to understand about a Constitution, that it restricts the power of government. It's a check and balance on government officials. Okay, so that is very important to understand it. Secondly, it's important to understand that a Constitution and the rule of law go hand in hand. And you'll be reading about this in your homework this week. And I know you haven't read Chapter 2 yet, probably, but how would you define the rule of law? How would you define the rule of law? The rule of law, especially as opposed to the rule of man. See, the rule of law is the law which rules equally over everyone. Yeah, it tells officials, in other words, it even governs officials. You can't have officials above the law. Sometimes we talk about people think they're above the law. Well, when you have the rule of law, that means even officials can be punished by the law. They're not above the law. Now, obviously, the rule of law did not rule for most of human history. What governed was the rule of man, where the person in power could do anything you wanted to do. The law didn't apply to them. You see as a funny cartoon about Putin demolishing the rule of law for the rule of man, right? But isn't that how most dictators are? When Pharaoh issued his decree to kill the baby boys, did he expect that decree to apply equally to everyone? Did he expect it to apply to his household? or to the Egyptian babies? Obviously not, right? So they didn't have rule of law in Egypt. Pharaoh was not a proponent of the rule of law. And a lot of people who serve in government would rather not have the law apply to them. They would rather come up with their own ideas, their own rules, and enforce their own ideas, which they're not subject to. Now, in your homework this week, you're going to be reading about the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law, and the fight for the rule of law. And you'll see how people have actually lost their heads over this issue, literally. Literally lost their heads. And you'll see how the rule of law serves as a check and balance. Before King Charles I in the 1600s, the law was king in theory, but the king was law in practice. And by the way, might I add, what a wicked handlebar mustache he was sporting upon his death. But after Charles, there was no doubt that the law was king, because even the king could be punished. I think you'll find that story interesting and enjoy that. Okay, now let's take a look at some of the biblical principles, because we've been talking about the rule of law. Well, the rule of law is a biblical idea. Israel had the rule of law because, let's face it, Israel had God's law. They had a constitution of sorts, and it's something we actually see in Deuteronomy 17. This is a chapter that contains several legal limits on the king of Israel, on the future king of Israel. And in future classes, we'll look at some of these limits. But anyway, after naming or listing several limitations, here's what God's law requires of each king. When he, the king, takes the throne of his kingdom, he is to write for himself on a scroll a copy of this law, taken from that of the priests who are Levites. It is to be with him, and he is to read it all the days of his life, so that he may learn to revere the Lord his God and follow carefully all the words of this law and these decrees, and not consider himself better than his brothers, and turn from the law to the right or the left. Then he and his descendants will reign a long time over his kingdom in Israel. So what is God saying here through Moses? What is the king supposed to do? A couple requirements here that the king's supposed to do. What is he supposed to do? He's supposed to follow God's law, yes. What else? And let me go back a slide too. He is to be careful to follow it, to read it, know it, follow it. Heck, yes, even make a copy for himself, like a constitution. That's why I said they had a constitution of sorts. Yeah, it makes you wonder if our legislators ever read our Constitution. To answer that, I want to show you an incredible conversation that comes from a videotape which was actually produced by historian David Barton. And so I will have, let's see, I'll have it was Christina I was going to have read this. Well, not all of it. Christina, you there?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, very good. Christina, I will be the narrator and the congressman, but if you would read David Barton's parts, that would be great. Okay? So we'll just have this dialogue. Oops, but I need to bring up the next slide, don't I? Let's see. There we go. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to be the narrator and the congressman. A conversation David Barton had with a U.S. congressman who is an accomplished attorney illustrates the power of the phrase separation of church and state, a phrase not found in the Constitution or Bill of Rights. The two were discussing the importance of religious values in public affairs. The congressman stated, "We know they're important, we just can't do anything about it."
Why not?
Well, we just can't.
Why?
Because of separation of church and state. We cannot have religious values in public affairs.
Separation of church and state? Where is that?
It's in the Constitution. The Constitution won't let us do it.
That's not in the Constitution.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. And so they went back and forth like this, like little children, I suppose, until David Barton gave the congressman a copy of the Constitution and asked, "Would you
Would you?
please find that?" Oh, sorry, I'm taking your line. Go ahead.
It's okay. Would you please find that phrase for me?
I'd be happy to. And so the congressman immediately went to the First Amendment, read it, and became very embarrassed. And he said, "I can't believe this. In law school, they always taught us that that's what the First Amendment said."
You've never read the Constitution for yourself?
"We were never required to read it in law school," the congressman said. And this expresses the dilemma we now have in America. Although the phrase separation of church and state is well known and commonly associated with the the First Amendment never states this. The words separation, church, or state are not only not found in the First Amendment, they are found in no founding document. You know, I've had parents after this class tell me, "Yeah, I went to law school," or sometimes I had one parent say, "Both of us, both husband and wife, been to law school." And what you said is absolutely true. They don't have us read the Constitution. We read Supreme Court opinions about the Constitution, but they're interpretations of the Constitution and quite frequently misinterpretations of the Constitution. I mean, basically, judges today are like Pharisees who think they know the law, but they've basically just learned teachings about the law and therefore twist and distort the law. But, what a change from 200 years ago. Alexis de Tocqueville, here's the French guy I told you about we're going to be reading. 26-year-old guy from France in 1831. He came to our country because he was sent by the French government to study certain aspects. He was sent by the French government to study certain aspects of our country, and what resulted from his study was a huge book showing what had made America so successful. And he discovered there were many things, but one of the things that clearly impressed him was America's education system. So anyway, that's why I asked Ella. Ella did our Nazi accent in the past. Now Ella can do a French accent. Oui, oui. Right, Ella? Let's do a sound check. Ella, testing, testing.
All right. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes, I can. Actually, let me turn my. Can't even find my. Oh well, I can hear you even though it's faint. All right.
Okay.
If you would read this, this comes from his book. I find this interesting. If you were to order his book today, it's called Democracy in America, but his original title was The Republic of the United States. It's interesting how we've, in our quest to turn ourselves into a democracy, we've even changed the name of his book. Anyway, Ella, go ahead and let us know what Mr. Tocqueville has to say to us today.
Oui. So it's been a while since I have used my French accent. So in New England, every citizen receives the elementary notions of human knowledge. He is taught, moreover, the doctrines and the evidences of his religion, the history of his country, constitution. In the states of Connecticut and Massachusetts, it is extremely rare to find a man, and I'm going all over the place with my accents, to find a man perfectly acquainted with all these things. And a person wholly ignorant of them is sort of a phenomenon. That was British and German and French all at the same time. Isn't that wonderful?
Ella, the same thing happens to me, and just as well that you did a great job. My French accent always sounds like the French peas, especially when I get into his extremely rare to find a man imperfectly acquainted with all the, people are like, Mr. Pratt, come on, this is not VeggieTales class. So no, you did a great job, Ella. Thank you very much. So, it's just like, Ella, you helped us to just almost hear it directly from him, right? But anyway, here you have roughly 200 years ago, American students. Oh, let me Turn off your mic there. Sorry. Thank you very much, Alan. American students were studying the leading features of the Constitution. Well, I think you guys should study the leading features of the Constitution as well. So, we're going to be looking at the Constitution. In fact, you've already started summarizing the Constitution, right? So, we'll be spending the rest of the semester on the Constitution, learning what our federal government is all about. Heck, you may end up knowing more of the Constitution than 99% of congressmen who have never read it, who think they know it, but they've never read it. The most important thing, though, that I think you will see is that our founders who put the Constitution together had a biblical view of man and government. And so as we look at the Constitution, we're going to see this over and over and over again. It's going to be the recurring theme, how the founders restricted and checked the power of government officials, and that was following a biblical theme. Now, a constitution is just one way to limit the power of government officials. There's other ways too, but all of this reflects our founders' belief in limited government. Why? Well, because again, they realize that man is sinful and that if given too much power, sinful man would abuse that power. So, that's where we're going to be going. I want to look at one common misconception, though, that the homework this week will deal with. And this relates to what's known as the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause is found in Article 6, Clause 2. And here's the Supremacy Clause. And as I read this, I would like for you to be looking for what are the three things that are the supreme law in this country, okay? So in answering the question, what are the three things? This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. Okay, so what are the three things that are the supreme law of the land, class? What are they? Well, you better start answering. I will start speaking in French to you, and then I will begin insulting you. Constitutions, laws, and treaties. Very good. There you have it. Now, notice with laws, it says laws made in pursuance thereof. What does that mean? Laws made in pursuance thereof. I mean, I notice you guys said U.S. laws, but be more specific, Bob. Little line from The Incredibles there. Since we're quoting modern videos, what does that mean? Laws made in pursuance of the Constitution. That align with, yes. So they're laws that are aligned with the Constitution or backed by the Constitution. Those are the laws that are supreme. Well, what about laws that have no constitutional authority? What about them? Are they the supreme law? What do you think? Hannah says, nah. So now, James, that's a little bit different flavor. When you say irrelevant, so that's still, in comparison, that means still somewhat relevant. I'm going to make the case to you that actually laws that have no constitutional authority are not supreme at all, and that this was actually the view of the Founding Fathers. Now, Congress does a lot of things that don't have constitutional authority. I mean, let's just get that out there. Listen to what one representative said a few years back when they were debating Obamacare. The question to this congressman was, where does the Constitution give the federal government authority to regulate health care delivery? Okay, this guy is an Obamacare supporter. He voted for it, and so he was asked, where's the authority in the Constitution? And he says, there's nothing in the Constitution that says the federal government has anything to do with most of the stuff we do. Well, if that's not an amazing admission, he admits that they're doing a lot of things that are unconstitutional. So, should these things be the supreme law? Well, in Federalist Paper 46, 33, in Federalist Paper 33, that's Alexander Hamilton. Um, Alexander Hamilton, who was a signer of the Constitution, by the way, he addressed this question about how to view laws that have no constitutional authority. And so I want to give you an example of what Alexander Hamilton said. But first, I want to give you some background information just so you can better understand Hamilton's point. So, as background, it helps to know the Constitution says, okay, Congress can pass a tax to pay for something that is authorized by the Constitution. So, for example, Constitution gives the federal government authority to raise an army. They can tax the people to fund and pay for the army, okay? Makes sense, right? So, having said that though, what if Congress passes a tax to pay for legitimate duties of the government, say, to fund an army, like I was just saying? Is that the supreme law of the land? Well, Alexander Hamilton would say, yes, it is. That is the supreme law of the land. All right. Let's take a look at a different example. Let's assume that some organization like, let's say, Gallup is conducting a study, and they determine that baseball is truly America's pastime. And several congressmen look at this study's findings, and they determine that they want to help promote our nation's pastime. So let's say Congress passes a tax to pay for more baseball fields. Should that be considered the supreme law of the land? What do you think? Yes or no? I know some of you baseball fans would say yes, and that would be good now during the baseball playoffs, right? Well, no, it would not be the supreme law of the land because there's no authority in the Constitution for that. Now, that's an easy example, okay? I will grant you. But, you know, in recent years, Congress has funded billions of dollars and, of course, taxed us to that degree. But they have paid out billions of dollars to pay for things like tattoo removals, sex ed classes, to help take over of car companies. The federal government took over General Motors for a while. They've spent money, millions and probably billions on bailing out banks that were struggling. They've funded solar-powered companies. I mean, all kinds of things our federal government has paid for which are not authorized by the Constitution. I mean, what do you think? Does that sound like money well spent? Well, whether it's well spent or not, and I don't think it does sound like money well spent, there's certainly no authority in the Constitution for these things. So, with that as a backdrop, let's look at what Hamilton said. Because he dealt with this question, and you can fill in the blanks in your notes. But he said, if the federal government passes a tax to pay for the legitimate duties of the federal government, is this the supreme law or not? He says, yes, it is. Okay? You know, like funding an army or whatever. But if the federal government passes a law which illegitimately forbids the states from collecting their own taxes, is this the supreme law or not? He says, no, it's not the supreme law because the states have legitimate authority to collect their own taxes. So if the federal government was to pass a law which disregards their constitutional authority, does things that they can't do, he says that's not the supreme law. Okay? It's not the supreme law. Article 6 of the Constitution makes sure that we are a government of laws, not a government of men doing whatever they want. Article 6 makes sure we're a nation under authority, not mere power. And this is Hamilton's point. Congress can't do anything it wants. If they pass laws that are not backed by the Constitution, then they're illegitimate laws. And really that ties in with a biblical view of government, because civil government can't do anything it wants. Now, you're right, Christina, that in some cases that is our choice, is to obey or risk punishment. So, for example, in future classes, we'll see that um, you know, Congress does tax us too much, and that a godly tax system would be under 10%. However, we still obey those laws that tax us more because, for one thing, we don't want to risk punishment. In other words, paying the excessive tax isn't forcing us to sin. It may be stressful, cause problems, but it's not forcing us to sin. However, there will be times where civil government will go outside of its authority and require something or ban something that puts you in a situation where you may come to the decision, I can't obey God and follow this law. And at that point, you will have to make the decision, I hope, like the apostles did, which is we obey God, not man. You know, but for a lot of these laws, they may be excessive, they may be without authority, they may be oppressive, but they don't necessarily require us to sin or disobey God. But we shouldn't want to be in that situation, and that's why you have checks and balances. That's why you have a constitution that limits government's authority. That's why you have separation of powers, where they can cancel each other out. These two checks and balances prevent government officials from just doing anything they want, right? And with a republic, representatives are elected by the people, and this allows accountability on those officials by allowing the people to fire them. Now, the Constitution is the ultimate man-made standard that we have, which limits the power of government. But as you know, it's under tremendous attack. I mean, you've seen this in the DVDs that you've been watching. But speaking of the Constitution, David Barton does a great, tremendous job of looking at the influences that contributed to the Constitution. I've said it's the highest man-made law, but I want you to see that lots of biblical principles went into it. So, uh, with um, with the time that we have left, I want to take a look at this. And I mentioned David Barton earlier, so now we're going to get to see him and see one of the videos he did. And earlier I gave you these URLs. If you haven't plugged in the first one, please do so. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start at 40 seconds on that first YouTube video. And how much time do we have? We're going to go to stop it at 7 minutes and 7 seconds. Okay, so go from 40 seconds to, let me see, let me pull it up here. So it should look something like that. Okay, and you see I've got it started at the 40-second mark, and take it to 7 minutes, and you can only see one. That's weird, because I put two in there. Well, if it's the one that ends with PNW, that's the one that you want to be watching. The second is restricted. That's weird. But anyway, so don't worry about the second one now. Just the one that ends with PNW. So go ahead and start it. And when you get to 7:07, yeah, the second one was a Tim Hawkins one, which you will thoroughly enjoy. Is very funny and is on point with civil government. Anyway, so go from 40 seconds to 7 minutes and 7 seconds, and then tell me when you are done. Go. All right, looks like everybody's done. Good. Can y'all hear me okay? Um, Okay, we're almost out of time, so just real quickly. Isn't it interesting? He started off talking about the godless constitution, right? How many sources did that book cite? 0. Right? Zilch. Nada. None. Isn't that amazing? What was the number one source quoted during the founding era? Yeah, their professional knowledge, right? The Bible, specifically Deuteronomy. Isn't that amazing? The Bible had a tremendous impact upon our Constitution, that really Declaration and Constitution, and that is what has led to so much freedom in this country. Now, we are out of time, but I've given you the video for Tim Hawkins, The Government Can. It kind of shows you the other end of things. Tim Hawkins, as you know, Christian comedian, very funny. And he did one, it's based on the tune of the Candyman Can. It is hilarious. So I encourage you to watch it. He basically pokes fun at big government, big powerful government that does whatever it wants to. It's very funny. It's 3 minutes long. You'll enjoy it. And by the way, the video we were watching, we ran out of time, but you know, there's 3 more minutes to it, so you can keep watching that too. There's good stuff there. Any questions as we end this? There's your homework again. Any questions, because we are out of time? Questions, questions, questions. All right. No questions then? Well, great. Remember to check for your class ending recaps. I will post the recording, and we'll see you next week, everybody. God bless. Take care.